Welcome to part 3 of the No-Rise Analysis training video series provided by the Kansas Department of Agriculture, Division of Water Resources. My name is Ben Ruffenall with WSP, and I will be guiding you through this training. In this video, we'll be going through an example of performing a no-rise analysis for a proposed development with a 1D effective model. We'll be checking the effective data, creating an existing conditions model, and making the changes to the existing conditions model to create the proposed condition model. Then we'll compare the two to see that the no-rise conditions are met. Here is an overview of our project site. So a developer wants to build a house on fill in an area that is impacted by the 100-year floodplain. There is no plan to have a basement for this home, so we have to design a building pad that takes them out of the floodplain without causing any negative impacts. The first thing we need to do is check the current effective mapping. So we can check the current effective mapping by using the FEMA Flood Map Service Center or FEMA's National Flood Hazard Layer Viewer. If the proposed development makes any changes within the designated floodway, a no-rise analysis and a map change may be required. If you go on the FEMA Flood Map Service Center, you can create these fermets after you search for the address. And here you can see our site actually falls within the floodway. So our development would actually change the grade within the floodway, even if the building pad is outside of the floodway. We're changing the grade in the floodway, so we're going to need to do a no-rise analysis here. While we're on the FEMA Mapping Service Center website, we can also check to see if there are any letter of map changes that have been approved in our project area. So on the FEMA Mapping Service Center, you can browse to effective products and expand that out, and it'll have a list of all the firm panels in our area. If we scroll down to the panel that our project site is in here, we can see in the letter of map change column if there are any letter of map changes in this panel. And if we click on that letter of map change, if it's there, in our case it is, it'll expand out and show all of the current approved letter of map changes in the panel. So we expand ours out here, we can see that all of these are either LOMAs or revaluations from the previous study, so none of them impact our project. Now we need to get a hold of the current effective modeling. The best way to get a hold of the current effective model is to request it from KDA through the BFE portal. If you get on the KDA website and navigate to the BFE portal, you'll have to register for an account, and then you'll be able to make the modeling request. And KDA will help you get the correct current effective model. We should also check with KDA on any current active mapping projects in our study area. If we go to the KDA website, we can find a map that shows all the current active projects in the state of Kansas. And if we scroll on down, we can find further details on where each of those projects stands. We can request any additional information about these projects through KDA, through the BFE portal, just like we did for the effective modeling. For our project here, we're working in Sedgwick County, and we can see that there is an active project ongoing in Sedgwick County. But after checking with KDA, we found that that project was going in another part of the county and not in our study area. So our first step in modeling is to create a duplicate effective model. All we have to do here is run the current effective model on our machine, and then we need to check the results against the current effective mapping and FIS data. If we go into the FIS, we can see the summary of discharges and we can check our model flows against the flows in the summary of discharges to make sure those match. Now, in our case here, this is an unsteady model, so it won't just be a simple flow table. We'll actually have to see the peak flow at each of these cross sections to check against the FIS table here. And then we can also check the regulatory elevation on the floodway data table here and check that against our cross sections. Then the next step is to see if we need a corrected effective model. Now remember, we only need a corrected effective model if we find some technical issues with the current effective model that were done at the time that the model went effective. This does not include any changes that have happened to the floodplain since the model went effective. And in our case here, we don't have any technical errors in our model, and so there's no issues that would require a corrected effective model. Now we can develop our existing conditions model. So we start with our duplicate effective model in this case, since we didn't need the corrected effective model. If you have a corrected effective model, you start with that. We need to add any additional detail that we may need to properly represent our proposed development into the existing conditions model. We do it in the existing conditions model so that when we get to our proposed conditions model and make the changes, and we're comparing back to this existing conditions model, we have cross sections that line up, so it's easy to see if we meet the no-rise criteria. This is also the time to update the model with any changes that have occurred on the reach since the effective date. And in our case here, there haven't been any. You can see in our case here, we added one additional cross section there that gives the model a little better representation of our proposed development. Once we have the existing conditions model created and ran, we need to compare it back to the duplicate effective model just to see how much our conditions change from that effective data. Make sure we're not making any significant changes here. So you can see in our comparison in this table that adding that cross section did have some minor changes around that cross section, but they were only a couple hundredths of a drop, so nothing that would actually change the elevations on the map. Remember to review cross sections upstream and downstream of your project site when you do this. Changes in one cross section can have cascading effects on upstream and downstream here, especially in this unsteady model. So now we can move on to our proposed conditions model. We create this as a copy of our existing conditions model, and we just apply our proposed changes to this model. You can see here our proposed grading plan for this project site. So we go to each cross section that crosses our proposed project site here where we're changing our grading, and we add that proposed fill and any proposed excavation. This is a 1D model, so it is important that we add that proposed excavation to account for any conveyance or storage losses we have in that cross section if we hope to meet our no-rise criteria. Once we have our proposed changes applied to our proposed conditions model and we've ran the model, we need to compare it back to our existing conditions model. Be sure to review cross sections upstream and downstream of the site again here. You can see in the table I do have a small change in that first cross section in the table, so you definitely need to make sure you go on upstream of this cross section here. But as you can see from the table, even though there's a couple of hundredths of a drop in elevation here, we do meet our no-rise condition. There is no increase in water surface elevation on our project site. I'll end this example with a few additional considerations here. So this example includes a proposed change to the effective floodway widths. When we actually change the grading on this site, we're narrowing down the floodway, and that'll change the width shown in the floodway data table in the FIS, and it'll change how the floodway is shown on the maps. Since this is a proposed mapping change, this will require a LOMAR. So that has some additional requirements that we'll need other than just this simple no-rise analysis. Only projects that don't have any proposed changes to the effective floodway and floodplain will require only a no-rise analysis and the additional state and local permits that you need for your project, and will avoid the FEMA letter of map change process. And of course, I'll end it by saying, if you can avoid the floodway, you can avoid all this no-rise and all the trouble you have to go through for this. So if you can, adjust your proposed development to stay out of the floodway. Here's a summary of the important points we hit in this video. Remember to check the project area effective mapping products for any letter of map changes that have been approved in the model area. Remember to check with KDA for future mapping updates. We don't want to go through this process and then only to find out in a couple of years the maps change and it puts your property back in the floodway. Check the effective model against the effective mapping in FIS. So remember that the duplicate effective model is required, and this is a good check to make sure that you have the correct starting model. If any technical errors are found in the model, remember to check with KDA first if you find these errors, and they may already be addressed, or you may need to address them with a corrected effective model. Be sure to add sufficient detail to properly represent your proposed development in the existing and proposed conditions modeling. Then compare the existing conditions model back to your duplicate effective model or corrected effective model to highlight any changes that have occurred in the floodplain since the maps went effective. If there are significant changes, you may need to contact KDA to let them know of the issues. Compare the existing conditions model to the proposed conditions model to check for your no-rise condition. If the project requires any changes to the effective mapping, then you will need a LOMAR. If you have any questions or need more information about anything that was discussed in this video or anything else involving permitting, you can contact the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Water Resources Water Structures Program at the following number or email address. You can also check the website listed here for additional information and additional contact information.